Hello and welcome to another episode of Gemstone Mine. I'm John.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Jake.
And today we have another lesson from cEDH. cEDH is a metagame within the Commander format that sits at one extreme, with highly consistent, highly efficient decks. Not all cards are equally powerful in all formats, or even in all metagames, but there are lessons to be learned with how people are brewing with the most powerful cards available in the history of Magic. And some of the most broken cards in Magic's history are seen in cEDH. It may come as a bit of a surprise that some of the staples from this metagame are not only affordable, but they can even make powerful additions to less powerful decks. Before we get to that though, where we start talking about some staples on a budget, we've got a little bit of news to talk about. So this week, we got our first peek at our upcoming sets over the summer. We are going to be seeing both Modern Horizons 2 and a summer set in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Guys, which one of these sets should we talk about first?
Let's do Modern Horizons 2 because it is first in our draft outline. I like it.
It's also the first to come out.
Alright, so Modern Horizons 2 is going to have some interesting looking stuff in it. We're going to be seeing the return of retro borders, is what they're calling it with the old card frame, on, among other things, enemy fetches. So Arid Mesa and that rotation of fetches originally seen in Zendikar. We're going to see Sanctum Prelate and Counterspell printed into Modern. And we got a peek at a new card, Jake.
Yeah, so continuing the trend of printing cards with set names, they are making Urza's Saga, which is an enchantment land with the type Urza's Saga, which makes me laugh very much. Basically, it's quick. It is an enchantment land, Urza's Saga type, so it is a saga. The first chapter is Urza's Saga gains tap, add colorless. The second chapter is Urza's Saga gains 2 in tap, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control, commonly known as a construct. And the third chapter is search your library for an artifact card with a mana cost 0 or 1, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle.
So after reading that, I have to guess that Chapter 2 is probably your favorite, right, Jake?
I don't know. I think the whole thing works together so very well. It's this is the kind of card I mentioned a few places that I enjoy seeing humor in cards, and this card has actually made me laugh more than a lot of silver bordered cards, with the added bonus of it's playable in my decks, and it is actually pretty good. So, yeah, looking forward to playing with this.
It does look pretty sweet. It's just going to be a colorless land that comes into play untapped that also slowly, incidentally gives you the side grade options to create a construct. And from what you described, it sounds like you do not need to tap the land on the third chapter to get that effect with the tutor?
That's right, so you can actually get 2 constructs out of it if you tap it for the construct creation and then do the sack trigger. It's interesting because it requires a mana cost 0 or 1. It's not CMC less than 1 or anything like that, so you can't get Arkham's Astrolabe because it costs snow. You can't get any of the artifacts that have no mana cost on them.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get a Soul Ring, and this will basically just upgrade your mana production. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that looks really cool. I'm excited to see where this set goes. Modern Horizons 1 was a lot of fun to play, and it would be fun to play this one too. But the other set we're going to be seeing is Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, the D&D crossover set. Alex, I'm going to let you take the lead here. What are you most excited to see from this set?
I'm excited to see how far into the lore and story they go into the Forgotten Realms, if they pull from any of the franchise, staples, which they are with Tiamat coming through. But I'm kind of just curious to see how they'll work that into a workable cEDH, EDH way of doing things.
Yeah, we're seeing the return of some D&D staple effects. We have a Vorpal Sword, we have a Portable Hole, we have Power Word Kill. It looks like there's going to be a Beholder based on one of the pieces of card art. We have Halfling as a creature type, Alex. I know that is right up your alley.
Just give him a crossbow, make him a rogue. Yeah. It is worth noting, I think Portable Hole, which is an artifact for just 1 white mana, when Portable Hole enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until Portable Hole leaves the battlefield. I actually think that's relatively strong.
It is actually really strong. And it's funny because that is like the other use case for Portable Hole. It's supposed to be used just to store stuff, but then got the clever adventuring party decides to use it as a portable pit trap.
Well, if you look at our format and consider all of the early turn plays, the mana vaults and the soul rings, things of that nature, turn 1 white mana portable hole just kind of removes that. And it's one of those weird effects where it's like you'd have to use a removal spell, something like a braid, to get rid of it. But it also feels like you're kind of just wasting a spell to remove something that is just a portable hole.
Oh no, I love the card. I love the card. Just from a flavor standpoint, you know what? No, from a flavor standpoint, I am glad they are educating new players on all the possible options you have with an item that the DM gives you. I think that's excellent.
The question is, are you going to be eventually be able to tell a story in cards of what happens to these adventurers? Does that prosperous innkeeper walk through his front door into a portable hole? Who knows?
Poor guy. That's horrible. He probably has kids.
Probably. They're at the bottom of the hole, too.
He does have treasure tokens, and he's green, so it's one of the... I think it's the first green treasure token creation, which is kind of neat.
I'm glad to see treasures just being evergreen in general. I think it is a great mechanic. But we got a little bit more news we got to get onto before we start just going down the portable hole of all the D&D stuff we could talk about today. Because we had our first Major League Commander game for Week 1.
That we did. I think I was the only one that actually got to watch the entire thing. Both of you actually had adult responsibilities to attend to. It turns out that with most Commander games, resolving an early hull breacher tends to make a pretty big of a difference on how the game flows.
So during that game, we had a matchup of Timmy T1000 had home field advantage, which under Major League Commander rules means that this person would have the first seat, then the other players at the table would roll to determine seating order. Sitting at the number 2 seat, we had from Into the North, we had Sick Robot playing Cole, the Forge Master, the Boros equipment combo deck. At the 3rd seat, we had Timna and Thrasios mid-range being played by Squirrel Mob. And in the 4th seat, we had High Tide Jace, Vern's Prodigy, being played by Shark. And it was Timmy T1000 who took down the game with that early Hull Breacher, dropped on turn 2 with Niv Mizzet Perun control. And turns out when the control deck gets its control elements online before the other players can even get a foot in the door, well, tell us what happened, Alex.
Yeah, it turned out to be Timmy T1000 got a good start. He dropped an early Hull Breacher, was able to resolve that at the end of another player, I believe at the end of Shark's turn, getting into play. Following up with a Imperial Recruiter to get Dockside Extortionist when coming to play, taking advantage of what the other players had in place in terms of artifacts, was immediately able to just get a Niv onto the battlefield. And then just the triggers started just going from there. Ultimately, this led to a dig through time resolving, filling up Timmy's hand, and pretty much just kind of locked him into the game at that point. There was a cursory one more round around the table before he finished the game off with Curiosity and Niv Mizzet.
I caught the second half of the game. I was unfortunately busy earlier in the evening with aforementioned responsibilities, but I was glad I got to see the second half of the game, even if it mostly appeared to just be Timmy just building towards his eventual win. Still really happy to see that this has started and looking forward. We're going to be releasing this episode. You'll be hearing it on Wednesday, and then on Friday will be the next set of games, and we should have a whole day of games on Saturday to enjoy. So keep following. It's going to be exciting this season.
And if you did miss the game, the replay is available on the Mind Sculptors YouTube channel.
And there will be a link in the description.
I don't know, should we put like a spoiler warning on this one just in case anyone hasn't seen it yet and don't want to know the end of the game?
Well, I haven't seen it yet, and you guys told me all about it, so I think everybody else has to suffer.
Oh, that's fair.
Agreed.
Misery and company.
Speaking of suffering, Alex, why don't we talk a little bit about the game we played last week when we got the gang back together to play in person again?
That's like
Alex,
a record. It's like 3 weeks in a row we got to play in person, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty good set of games. Although I will say the first game absolutely turned into a murder slog of just sitting there doing nothing for about 10 turns.
Fairness, people were doing things. They just weren't really advancing towards other players. Like, you're building a board state, I'm building a board state, but no one's infringing on anyone else. So the game wasn't going anywhere. It was just a stalemate of building board decks, and we ultimately just decided to call the game a 4-way draw, and then go on to the next game, which I sat out because I was busy building a new deck for myself, which I'll talk about here in a bit. And then the second game also turned into a pretty large draw, didn't it?
Yep. Lots of draws that game. So I mostly was on my Oketra deck, trying to give our newer players a chance to play with their new decks. We had One of my sisters playing with her mono green Toski deck, and she got to break out some of the new cards. Did not get to live the dream of having an Eldrazi squirrel or a squirrel backed by Craterhoof, but she did get to see some of her new cards and test those out, which was good.
Now, it's funny you mentioned that, because it's kind of a bit of a segue, but this Friday's F&M Online on Arena was Historic Brawl. And in honor of you, John, and I have a picture of it, I actually built a Oketra Brawl deck, where it's exactly how you would have built it, where let's ramp out the cat, and then just make a bunch of zombie tokens. And it did fairly well. So I thought of you.
I'm glad to hear it. So Jake, did you get to play any games since last we talked?
No, my decks are still all currently packed up in boxes on the side of the room. Hooray!
The only other excitement that I got to enjoy was I got to test out my Malcolm and Kedis deck. It is done being built. I am now working on a polymorph variant of it, and I managed to score 2 wins yesterday at the cEDH table. That felt good, so I'm currently working on the primer for it now.
Are you planning to submit this to the cEDH decklist database at some point?
I'm going to give a try submitting it. I don't know if it would even make it to the Brewer's Corner, but I will try once I have the primer done.
I believe in you.
Well,
it seems like a pretty cool deck. I haven't played against it yet, but I really want to.
Oh, thank you. You did a lot of help with the initial build of the thing, and then you were also pretty helpful at saying, hey, John, why don't you not play this card? Why don't you play a card that actually advances your game plan instead? The sobering realization of having the designated driver of deck building. Well, speaking of building and brewing, Jake, how are your decks going? You're currently working on, I think, both an Extus deck and a Nath deck.
Yeah, they, like everything else fun in my life, have kind of taken a temporary hiatus as responsibilities pile on. But I do have an Extus list in the works, made a couple little tweaks to it. And for the Nath deck, excitingly, there is a Nath Discord, and when Quinman picked the deck in the draft, they decided to go through and do some updates on the primer. And yeah, so there's been some more discussion going on in there on getting the deck a little tweaked. And I know that recently there was a 1-hour discussion on Nath that was released on the cEDH Discord on YouTube, I believe. I have queued it up, but have not sat down to watch it. It's on my to-do list.
Awesome. And Alex, you're working on a new deck too. You are working on a dragon.
I am. I am working on Galazeth Prismari. Those of you that listen to us since we started, well, shouldn't be a surprise to any of you that I prefer my creature-based strategies. At one point in time, one of the videos, Jake and John challenged me to build a deck that wins on the stack and not on the battlefield. Finally getting around to doing that. I have my dragon. The list is about 90% complete. I'm just kind of working out whether or not I want to do extra turns or just more card draw or redundancy. I don't know. But it's getting there. And there are no mana dorks, so that's something. That's promise fulfilled, right?
I'm looking forward to seeing this one in action, personally.
I just like it. It keeps the token strategy alive. Tons of tokens. And they're all treasure. They're all treasure tokens.
They're all shiny, exactly. It's everything you could possibly want.
I mean, it's dragons, it's treasure. I feel that this works.
You can reach the crew from Gemstone Mine on Twitter at GemstoneMineMTG, or send us an email at gemstoneminepodcast@gmail.com. On YouTube, we're Gemstone Mine Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.